In the vast expanse of the galaxy, there existed species that had mastered faster than light travel, built cities that floated among the stars, and created technologies that could reshape entire worlds. They considered themselves the pinnacle of civilization, the enlightened guardians of order and peace.
They had rules, protocols, and careful systems designed to keep the galaxy stable and safe, but they had never encountered a species quite like the humans. When the Zephyrian Council received that desperate distress signal from the Outer Rim, they thought they were dealing with another simple rescue operation, pirates perhaps, or a natural disaster that their advanced technology could easily resolve. They had no idea that their response would trigger a chain of events that would forever change how the galaxy viewed both mercy and vengeance. The aliens had called for aid, expecting salvation from their enlightened neighbors.
Instead, they got something far more terrifying and far more effective than they could have ever imagined. They got the Deathworlders.
They got humanity. This is the story of one tragic mistake that taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget about the difference between those who speak of justice and those who deliver it with their own hands, regardless of the cost. The meditation chambers of the Zephyrian Council ship Eternal Harmony hummed with the soft vibrations of quantum engines maintaining perfect subspace equilibrium. Ambassador Kelrian adjusted his ceremonial robes, the silver threads catching the gentle blue light that bathed the council chamber.
Today's agenda was routine. Trade dispute mediation between the Andromedan miners and the crystal harvesters of Vega Prime, followed by the quarterly peace accord renewal with the Centauri Alliance.
The Zephyrians prided themselves on being the galaxy's peacekeepers, a role they had assumed naturally due to their advanced technology and, more importantly, their philosophy of non-violence and measured response. Their ships were marvels of engineering, equipped with shields that could deflect planet-killer weapons and medical bays that could resurrect the recently dead.
Yet they carried no weapons beyond non-lethal restraint fields, believing that violence only begot more violence. Council Session 774 commencing. Announced the ship's artificial intelligence in the melodious tones preferred by Zephyrian culture.
All members present and accounted for. Ambassador Kelrian nodded to his fellow council members, their translucent blue skin shimmering slightly in the chamber's ambient light. The Zephyrians had evolved beyond the need for solid food, surviving on energy absorption and meditation, which they believed made them purer vessels for diplomatic wisdom. Before we begin today's scheduled proceedings, spoke Councillor Valen from her floating meditation pod. I must address the growing concern about the Outer Rim territories. Our monitoring stations have detected increased pirate activity near the Kepler systems.
The galactic protection protocols remain clear, Kelrian responded, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who had spent centuries perfecting the art of diplomatic speech. We provide aid only when specifically requested, and only through proper channels.
Intervention without invitation is the path of the warmongers. The other council members murmured their agreement.
This was fundamental Zephyrian doctrine. Help would be given freely and generously, but only to those who asked for it properly, and only through peaceful means. They had learned this lesson after the Proxima incident 300 years earlier, when their well-intentioned intervention in a civil war had resulted in decades of resentment and diplomatic complications. The peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the sharp, urgent tones of the emergency communication array activating without warning.
Priority 1 distress signal incoming, the AI announced, its tone shifting to the more urgent harmonics reserved for genuine emergencies. Origin. Kepler.
442 System 4th Planet. Signal authenticity verified through galactic emergency protocols.
The main viewing screen materialized in the center of the chamber, displaying the scrambled static-filled image of what appeared to be a Silean, one of the peaceful agricultural species that inhabited the Outer Rim worlds. The being's normally pristine white fur was matted with what looked suspiciously like blood, and its large, expressive eyes were wide with terror.
Please, anyone who receives this message. The voice was barely a whisper, punctuated by the sounds of explosions and screaming in the background. The Korvaxi have found us. They've breached the planetary defense grid. Our cities are burning. The children, oh, stars help us. They're taking the children. The image flickered and stabilized momentarily, showing the full horror of the situation. Behind the Silean messenger, buildings were collapsing as massive ships bombarded the surface with energy weapons. Small figures could be seen running through the smoke and debris. Civilians fleeing for their lives.
The Korvaxi are demanding our quantum crystals and our compliance with their expansion protocols, the messenger continued, flinching as another explosion echoed through the transmission. They've given us 2 standard days to surrender completely or face total extermination. Please, if anyone can hear this, we have over 40 million civilians on this world. The children don't understand why the sky is falling. We're not soldiers. We're farmers, teachers, healers. We've never hurt anyone.
Please help us. The transmission cut to static, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Councillor Valen was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. The Korvaxi hegemony. We should have known they would eventually turn their attention to the agricultural worlds.
Kellyan accessed the Korvaxi files through his neural interface, the information flooding his consciousness in the cool, analytical way that Zephyrian minds process data. The Korvaxi were a militaristic species that had been expanding aggressively through the Outer Rim for the past 50 years. They were known for their brutal efficiency and complete disregard for civilian casualties. Their standard operating procedure was to demand total surrender from their targets, followed by the systematic enslavement of the population and strip mining of all valuable resources.
The Salians have submitted a formal request for aid through proper diplomatic channels, reported Councillor Thane, his elderly features grave with the weight of the decision before them. Under the Galactic Protection Protocols, we are obligated to respond. But what can we realistically do? Asked Councillor Mirren, the youngest member of the council. The Korvaxi fleet in that system consists of at least 20 heavy warships. Our ships are designed for rescue and evacuation, not combat. A direct confrontation would likely result in our own destruction without significantly helping the Silians. Kellyan found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to balance Zephyrian principles with harsh reality. Their technology was advanced, yes, but it was designed for preservation and healing, not warfare. Their ships could create powerful defensive shields and could evacuate thousands of civilians quickly, but they had no offensive capabilities that could match the Korvaxi war machine. We could attempt to negotiate with the Korvaxi leadership, suggested Valen. Perhaps we can convince them that the agricultural worlds are more valuable as trading partners than as conquered territories. The Korvaxi don't negotiate, Thane replied grimly. Their entire society is built around the concept of strength through conquest. They see diplomacy as a sign of weakness. Any attempted negotiation would likely be interpreted as an opportunity to demand our surrender as well. The chamber fell silent again as each council member contemplated their limited options. Through the viewing screen, they could see the real-time orbital scans of Kepler 442, showing the Korvaxi fleet in standard siege formation around the planet. The agricultural world's primitive defense satellites had been quickly destroyed, and energy weapon bombardment was already beginning to target major population centers. There is one other option, Kellyan said slowly, accessing classified files that even most Zephyrians were not permitted to know about. The Terran sector has recently achieved faster-than-light capability. Their species, the humans, have been classified as what the xenobiologists term Deathworlders. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted noticeably. Deathworlders were almost mythological to most civilized species, beings that had evolved on worlds so hostile that survival required levels of aggression and adaptability that bordered on the incomprehensible. Most galactic civilizations had developed on garden worlds, under the protection of gentle stars, evolving intelligence as a means of cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The preliminary reports from our first contact teams are disturbing, Kellyan continued, sharing the classified files with his fellow council members. The humans evolved on a world they call Earth, which features massive climate variations. Predators specifically evolved to hunt intelligent prey, natural disasters that can devastate entire continents, and gravity nearly twice what most species consider comfortable. The humans not only survived these conditions but thrived under them.
What does this have to do with our current situation? Mirren asked, though her voice suggested she was beginning to understand. The humans have been seeking contact with other spacefaring civilizations, Kellyan explained. Our xenopsychologists believe they would view the Silian situation as what they call an injustice that demands correction. According to our behavioral analysis, humans have a documented tendency to intervene in conflicts on behalf of what they perceive as innocent victims, regardless of the personal cost or risk involved.
Councillor Thane leaned forward in his meditation pod, his ancient eyes narrowing. Are you suggesting we request human intervention in this matter? I'm suggesting we inform them of the situation, Kellyan said carefully. Purely as a matter of diplomatic courtesy, of course. We would be sharing information about a threat to civilian populations with a neighboring star nation, which is standard protocol for galactic neighbors. It was a fine distinction, but an important one in Zephyrian diplomatic philosophy. They could not directly request that another species commit acts of violence, even in defense of innocence. But they could share information and allow that species to make their own decisions about how to respond. The risk is enormous, Balin pointed out. We know very little about human capabilities or intentions. What if they decide that the Zephyrian Council represents a threat to their expansion? What if they view our peaceful nature as weakness to be exploited? What if they view it as evidence that we can be trusted? Kellyan countered.
Our analysts believe that humans value what they call integrity and honor above most other considerations. A species that keeps its word and helps those in need would likely earn their respect rather than their contempt.
The debate continued for several more minutes, but the reality of their situation gradually became undeniable. The Zephyrian fleet could evacuate perhaps a few 100,000 Silians before the Korvaxi moved to prevent further rescues. Diplomatic negotiations were impossible with a species that viewed anything short of total surrender as an act of war. They simply did not have the tools necessary to save 40 million innocent civilians from extinction. I will compose a message for the Terran government, Kalyan finally decided. A simple factual report about the situation in the Kepler 442 system, with detailed information about Korvaxi capabilities and intentions. We will present it as a courtesy briefing for a neighboring spacefaring civilization, nothing more.
And if the humans decide to intervene, Thane asked, then that will be their decision, made with full knowledge of the consequences. Kellyan replied, we cannot be responsible for the choices made by others, only for ensuring that those choices are made with accurate information. As the Council began composing the message that would change the course of galactic history, none of them truly understood what they were about to unleash. The humans were indeed Deathworlders, but they were something more than that, something the galaxy's peaceful civilizations had never encountered before. They were Deathworlders with principles. The message was transmitted to Earth within the hour, carried by quantum entanglement communicators across the vast distance between the Zephyrian Council ship and the Terran home system. It was a simple, factual report about an ongoing humanitarian crisis in a neighboring star system, with detailed tactical information about the military forces involved and the timeline for potential civilian casualties. What happened next would teach the galaxy that sometimes, when civilized options have been exhausted, the universe has a way of providing less civilized solutions. The humans received the message at 14:37 Coordinated Universal Time on a Tuesday afternoon. By 14:45, emergency protocols were being activated across every military installation on Earth and throughout human-controlled space. The Deathworlders were going to war. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the war room of the UES Defiance, humanity's flagship and most advanced warship, watching as the holographic display updated with real-time intelligence from the Kepler 442 system. The data flowing across multiple screens painted a clear picture: 40 million civilians under siege by an overwhelming military force, with less than 36 hours remaining before the ultimatum expired. Ma'am, we've confirmed the Zephyrian intelligence, reported Commander James Harrison, his voice tight with controlled anger. 22 Korvaxi heavy cruisers, 4 dreadnoughts, and what appears to be a planetary bombardment platform. They're not just threatening the Silians. They're already conducting what our analysts are calling demonstration strikes on civilian targets. Chen nodded grimly. At 52, she had served in the Titan Wars, the Mars colonial conflicts, and the brutal suppression of the Outer Belt pirates. She had seen humanity at its worst and at its best, but she had never encountered a situation quite like this. An entire species crying out for help against extinction with no one else in the galaxy apparently capable of providing meaningful assistance. What's our response time to the Kepler system, she asked, though she already knew the answer would be far from encouraging. Assuming we deploy immediately with the full Terra defense fleet, we're looking at minimum 18 hours through hyperspace, Harrison replied. That gives us at most 12 hours to neutralize the threat before the Korvaxi deadline expires. And their force composition compared to ours. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, the fleet's tactical analyst, stepped forward with the grim mathematics of space warfare already calculated. The Korvaxi fleet significantly outguns us in terms of raw firepower, Admiral. Their ships are larger, more heavily armored, and mounting weapons systems we've never seen before. In a straight fight, our probability of success is estimated at less than 30%. Chen studied the tactical display, her mind automatically running through the strategic calculations that had kept humanity alive through decades of conflict with hostile forces. The numbers were indeed bleak, but numbers didn't always tell the complete story of how battles were won and lost. What do we know about Korvaxi tactics and psychology? According to the Zephyrian intelligence package, they're a highly aggressive militaristic species, Santos continued. They prefer overwhelming force applied quickly to break enemy morale. Their standard procedure is to position their fleet in a sphere formation around a target planet and systematically bombard strategic locations until surrender is achieved. They seem to value efficiency over subtlety. Any weaknesses in their approach? Possibly. The sphere formation provides excellent coverage against planetary defenses, but it would be vulnerable to a concentrated attack from outside the formation. They also appear to follow rigid tactical doctrines,
which could make them predictable in a fluid combat situation. Chen turned to Commander Harrison. What's the status on fleet readiness? The entire Terra Defense fleet can be ready for hyperspace jump within 4 hours, he reported. All ships are fully crewed and supplied. The question is whether we should commit everything to this operation.
It was a fair question. The Terra Defense Fleet represented humanity's entire space-based military capability, committing every available ship to rescue a species they had never met, in a star system they had never visited, against an enemy whose capabilities were largely unknown, was exactly the kind of decision that could result in humanity's first and last major space battle.
There's something else we need to consider, interrupted Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the fleet's xenopsychologist and one of the few humans who had studied the preliminary reports from first contact with other species. The political implications of this action could be enormous. Explain, Chen said. This would be humanity's first major interaction with galactic civilization, Kane continued. How we handle this situation will likely determine how we're perceived and treated by every other species for generations to come. If we succeed in saving the Silians, we establish ourselves as a reliable ally and a force for justice. If we fail, 40 million innocents die while we watch. Chen interrupted. Doctor, I appreciate the political considerations, but there are some decisions that transcend politics. Kane nodded, recognizing the steel in the Admiral's voice that had made her legendary throughout human space. I understand, Admiral, but there's another aspect to consider. According to the psychological profiles we've developed, humans are apparently unique in our willingness to risk everything for strangers. Most galactic species seem to operate on much more careful cost-benefit analysis. Our response to this crisis could fundamentally change how we're perceived, either as noble protectors or as dangerous, unpredictable warmongers. Let them think what they will, Chen replied. Right now, there are children hiding in basements while warships bomb their homes from orbit. That's not a political problem. That's a moral imperative. She turned to address the entire staff. I want every ship captain on conference call in 10 minutes. We're going to war. As the communication systems activated and the complex machinery of mobilizing humanity's military forces began turning, Chen found herself reflecting on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. Humans had achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 years earlier, and their first contact with alien life had occurred barely 18 months ago. Now they were about to commit everything to save a species they knew almost nothing about.
But that was exactly the kind of logic that made sense to a species that had evolved on Earth. Sometimes you didn't have time to carefully analyze all the factors.
Sometimes you saw something wrong happening and you acted to stop it, regardless of the consequences to yourself. The conference call activated, connecting Chen with the captains of humanity's 37 active warships. Each face on the screen represented thousands of hours of training, years of experience, and the hopes of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Captains, Chen began without preamble. We have a situation in the Kepler 442 system. 40 million civilians are under siege by an overwhelming hostile force. With 34 hours remaining before a deadline for total surrender or extermination, the Terran Council has authorized us to respond with full military force. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance was the first to speak. Admiral, what are our rules of engagement? Complete neutralization of the hostile force threatening civilian populations, Chen replied. This is a humanitarian intervention with full authorization for whatever level of force is necessary to protect innocent life. Captain Okafor of the UES Justice leaned forward on the screen. Ma'am, are we prepared for the possibility that this could escalate into a full-scale war with the Korvaxi hegemony? Captain, we cross that bridge when we come to it, Chen said. Right now, our focus is on saving lives.
Everything else is secondary. The discussion continued for 20 minutes, covering tactical deployment, logistics, and contingency planning. Each captain understood that they were about to participate in something that could either establish humanity as a major power in galactic affairs or result in their complete destruction as a spacefaring species.
When the conference call ended, Chen found herself alone with Commander Harrison and Dr. Kane, looking out through the reinforced viewing ports at the ships of the Terra Defense Fleet beginning their final preparations for hyperspace jump. Sarah, Harrison said, using her first name as he only did in private, are we doing the right thing? Chen considered the question seriously. In 18 hours they would drop out of hyperspace in an unknown star system, facing an enemy force that outgunned them significantly, with the lives of 40 million strangers hanging in the balance. It was exactly the kind of odds that military strategists were trained to avoid. James, my grandfather, fought in World War II, she said finally. He once told me that there are moments in history when you have to choose between what's safe and what's right.
He said the people who choose safety sleep better at night, but the people who choose right can look at themselves in the mirror in the morning. And if we lose, then we lose trying to do something worth doing, Chen replied. But I don't think we're going to lose. What makes you so confident? Chen smiled, and for the first time since receiving the distress call, there was something other than grim determination in her expression.
Because the Korvaxi made one crucial mistake in their planning. They've never fought humans before.
As the Terra Defense Fleet prepared for hyperspace jump, word of the mission began spreading through human civilian populations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, offering to join the rescue mission in any capacity possible. Supply ships began loading additional medical supplies, emergency shelters, and humanitarian aid for the Silian refugees. Most remarkably, private citizens began donating money, resources, and time to support a rescue mission for aliens they had never met, on a world they had never heard of, for reasons that had nothing to do with human interests or security. It was the kind of response that would have baffled most galactic civilizations, where individual survival and species advancement were considered the primary motivating forces for any major undertaking.
The idea that an entire species would voluntarily risk its military future for the sake of strangers was almost incomprehensible to beings who had evolved in more peaceful circumstances. But humans had never evolved in peaceful circumstances.
They had evolved in a world where cooperation with strangers could mean the difference between life and death, where protecting the innocent from predators was necessary for species survival, and where the willingness to fight against overwhelming odds was often the only thing that stood between civilization and chaos.
The Terra Defense Fleet entered hyperspace at 2347 Coordinated Universal Time. 37 ships carrying humanity's hopes and fears toward a confrontation that would define their role in galactic civilization for generations to come. In the Kepler 442 system, Korvaxi sensors detected the incoming hyperspace signatures 17 hours before the human fleet was scheduled to arrive. Commander Vex, leader of the siege force, reviewed the sensor data with the casual indifference of someone who had conducted dozens of similar operations.
Unknown vessels approaching from the direction of the Terran sector, reported his tactical officer. Estimate 37 ships. Military configuration. The humans, Vex said dismissively. I was wondering when they would make their move. How long until they arrive? 17 hours, Commander. Excellent. That gives us time to send a clear message about the consequences of interfering with Korvaxi expansion. Vex activated the planetary bombardment systems. Begin targeting civilian population centers. I want the humans to arrive to find a dead world. That should discourage any future humanitarian impulses. What Commander Vex didn't understand was that he had just made the second worst mistake possible when dealing with humans. The worst mistake would have been attacking human civilians directly. The second worst was harming innocents while humans were on their way to help. The last transmission from Kepler 442 reached the approaching human fleet 4 hours before their arrival. It was a brief message from a Silian emergency shelter deep underground. The bombing has intensified. They're targeting the schools and hospitals now. We can hear the children crying. Please hurry. When Admiral Chen shared that message with her fleet, something changed in the collective psychology of 37 ship crews.
The mission was no longer about political implications or strategic considerations or even humanitarian obligations. It had become personal.
The Terra Defense Fleet dropped out of hyperspace with weapons already charging and targeting systems locked onto Korvaxi ships. They had traveled across space to save strangers who had become friends they had never met, and they arrived to find a world under bombardment from orbit. Commander Vex was about to learn why every predator that had ever hunted humans on Earth was now extinct. The human fleet materialized from hyperspace like vengeful ghosts, their ships emerging from the quantum foam in a formation that no galactic military academy had ever taught. Instead of the traditional sphere or line formations preferred by most species, the humans had arranged themselves in what Admiral Chen called a wolf pack configuration. Scattered groups of ships that could support each other while maintaining maximum tactical flexibility. Commander Vex stared at the tactical display aboard his flagship Dominant Fang with the first stirrings of unease he had felt in decades of conquest. The human ships were smaller than Korvaxi vessels and appeared to carry lighter armament, but there was something about their approach that triggered instincts honed through thousands of years of predatory evolution. Unknown vessels, this is Commander Vex of the Korvaxi hegemony. He transmitted on standard diplomatic frequencies.
You are interfering with a legal military operation conducted under the authority of Korvaxi expansion protocols. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The response came within seconds, transmitted simultaneously to every ship in the Korvaxi fleet and broadcast on emergency frequencies toward the planet below.
Commander Vex, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are here to protect innocent civilians from unlawful attack. You have 30 seconds to cease bombardment of the planet and withdraw to minimum safe distance, or we will consider your forces hostile and act accordingly. Vex's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species.
30 seconds? These mammals thought they could issue ultimatums to the most feared military force in the Outer Rim?
The arrogance was almost entertaining. Human Admiral, he replied. You were addressing the commander of 26 warships crewed by the finest warriors in known space. Your vessels are outnumbered and outgunned. I suggest you reconsider your position before I demonstrate the consequences of challenging Korvaxi supremacy. Commander, came Chen's voice again, and there was something in her tone that made Vex's tactical officer lean forward nervously at his station. You've been bombing schools and hospitals for the past 4 hours. Children are dying while you and I exchange pleasantries.
29 seconds. What happened next became the subject of tactical analysis and strategic debate for the rest of galactic history. The human fleet didn't charge forward in the glorious frontal assault that Korvaxi doctrine suggested all inferior species would attempt. They didn't try to match the Korvaxi sphere formation with their own defensive positioning.
Instead, they simply vanished. Where did they go? Vex demanded, staring at sensors that showed empty space where 37 human warships had been moments before.
Unknown, Commander, his tactical officer replied, manipulating controls frantically. They appear to have activated some form of stealth technology.
We're reading massive electromagnetic disturbances but no solid contacts.
Impossible. No known species has stealth technology that can hide entire fleets from Korvaxi sensors. Sir, we're detecting energy signatures consistent with weapon charging.
Multiple sources, but locations are shifting. Vex was beginning to understand that he might have miscalculated. The humans weren't following standard space combat doctrine because they apparently hadn't read the standard space combat manual. They were fighting like the apex predators they had evolved from, using tactics that prioritized confusion and terror over brute force. All ships, activate full defensive shields and prepare for. The first human attack came from directly above the Korvaxi formation, where no sane military commander would position ships during a space battle. The UES Retribution materialized out of stealth just long enough to launch a spread of what humans called kinetic penetrator rounds. Solid tungsten cores accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by magnetic rail systems. The rounds punched through the shields and armor of the Korvaxi heavy cruiser Blood Tide like bullets through tissue paper, causing a series of explosions that lit up space for thousands of kilometers in all directions. Before the Korvaxi could respond, Retribution had vanished back into stealth, and 2 more human ships had appeared on the opposite side of the formation, launching their own devastating attacks against targets that had no time to properly defend themselves.
This is impossible, Vex roared. How are they coordinating these attacks? Where are they getting their targeting information? His tactical officer's voice was tight with fear. Commander, I think they're using some form of quantum entanglement communication system. They're sharing targeting data instantaneously across their entire fleet. Every ship knows what every other ship is doing in real time.
And the stealth technology? Near as we can determine, they're using controlled gravitational fields to bend sensor radiation around their ships. It's not true invisibility, but it's close enough to make targeting extremely difficult.
Vex realized with growing alarm that the humans had come to this battle with technology specifically designed to counter Korvaxi tactical advantages. Somehow, impossibly, these newcomers to galactic civilization had analyzed Korvaxi combat doctrine and developed countermeasures in the few hours between receiving the distress call and arriving for battle. All ships, break formation and engage individual targets, he commanded. Random, evasive patterns.
Don't let them predict our movements. It was sound tactical thinking, but it revealed that Commander Vex still didn't understand what kind of enemy he was facing. The moment the Korvaxi formation began to break apart, the human wolves struck with coordinated precision that bordered on the supernatural. Ships appeared from stealth in perfect positions to catch isolated Korvaxi vessels between crossfires.
Human captains anticipated Korvaxi evasive maneuvers with uncanny accuracy, placing weapons fire exactly where enemy ships would be rather than where they had been. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance found himself engaged with a Korvaxi dreadnought that outmassed his ship by a factor of 5.
Under normal circumstances, it should have been a quick and decisive victory for the Korvaxi vessel. Instead, Rodriguez used his ship's superior maneuverability to stay in the dreadnought's sensor shadows, striking at critical systems and jumping back into stealth before return fire could lock onto his position.
Their armor is heavier than expected, he reported to Admiral Chen over the quantum communication link, but it's designed to stop energy weapons. These kinetic rounds are punching right through.
Confirmed, replied Captain Okafor from the U.S. Justice. Korvaxi defensive doctrine appears to be based on deflecting particle beams and plasma weapons.
They're not prepared for solid projectile attacks at these velocities.
The battle raged for 23 minutes, with human ships appearing and disappearing like ghosts, while Korvaxi vessels found themselves unable to land effective return fire. The technological advantages that had made the Korvaxi hegemony the terror of the Outer Rim were being systematically negated by human tactics that emphasize speed, coordination, and the willingness to take enormous risks for tactical advantage.
Commander Vex watched his fleet being destroyed piece by piece and found himself facing a reality that challenged everything he had believed about military superiority. The humans weren't just winning because of superior technology, they were winning because they thought about warfare in ways that no other species had considered.
Sir, we've lost 17 ships, his tactical officer reported. The savage truth and endless hunger are reporting critical damage. The humans are concentrating fire on our heavy weapons platforms. What are our casualties? Approximately 4,000 dead or wounded.
Enemy casualties appear to be minimal. How many human ships have we destroyed? The silence that followed answered the question more effectively than words could have.
Sir, came a tentative voice from the communication station. We're receiving a transmission from the human admiral. Put it through. Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge of dominant Fang, calm and professional despite the carnage of the past 20 minutes. Commander Vex, you have lost approximately 70% of your fleet capability.
Your remaining ships are outgunned and outmaneuvered. I'm offering you one opportunity to withdraw your forces and depart this system peacefully.
You think you have won? Vex snarled. This fleet represents less than 5% of Korvaxi military might. Even if you destroy every ship here, the hegemony will send 100 fleets to avenge this insult.
Commander, you seem to be under the impression that we're concerned about future conflicts with the Korvaxi hegemony. Chen replied, and there was something in her voice that made every Korvaxi warrior on the bridge suddenly aware of their own mortality. Let me clarify something for you. We didn't come here to send a message or establish diplomatic relations. We came here to save innocent lives. Everything else is secondary. You cannot protect every world in the galaxy, human. We don't need to protect every world in the galaxy, Chen said. We just need to make it clear that attacking innocent civilians while humans are around to do something about it is a very bad idea. Consider this your educational experience.
What happened next became known throughout galactic civilization as the Kepler demonstration. The remaining human ships emerged from stealth in perfect formation around the crippled Korvaxi fleet. Instead of delivering a killing blow, they simply maintained targeting locks on every enemy vessel while Admiral Chen continued speaking.
Commander, you're going to take your surviving ships and leave this system. You're going to return to Korvaxi space and inform your leadership that the Terran Defense Fleet considers attacks on civilian populations to be acts of terrorism, and we respond to terrorism accordingly. If we hear about Korvaxi forces threatening innocent lives anywhere in the galaxy, we will find you and we will stop you. And if we refuse, then in approximately 90 seconds you'll find out why humans are classified as Deathworlders. Commander Vex looked around his bridge at crew members who were no longer the confident warriors who had begun this operation. They were looking at their tactical displays, at the human ships that had appeared as if from nowhere, at the casualty reports that showed the complete destruction of more than half their fleet by an enemy they had never even managed to hit. All ships, he said finally, prepare for hyperspace jump. We are withdrawing from this system. A wise choice, Chen replied. Commander, one more thing. If any of your ships fire on the planet during your withdrawal, or if you make any attempt to attack civilian evacuation operations, we will interpret that as a continuation of hostilities. I trust I'm being clear. The Korvaxi fleet departed Kepler 442 12 minutes later, leaving behind the wreckage of 17 ships and the first tactical defeat in hegemony history.
As the last Korvaxi vessel vanished into hyperspace, Admiral Chen opened communications with the planet below. Selene Emergency Command, this is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet.
The immediate threat has been neutralized. We're preparing to begin humanitarian assistance operations.
Can you give us a status report on civilian casualties and infrastructure damage? The voice that replied was weak with exhaustion and hoarse from crying, but carried a note of hope that hadn't existed an hour earlier. Admiral Chen, thank you.
Thank you so much. We have approximately 3 million displaced civilians in emergency shelters.
Medical facilities in the major cities have been destroyed, and our communication networks are severely damaged. We We don't know how to repay you. No payment necessary, Chen replied. Just tell us what you need and we'll get it to you. That's what neighbors are for.
As human ships began deploying medical teams and emergency supplies to the battered world below, word of the Battle of Kepler 442 began spreading throughout galactic civilization.
For the first time in galactic history, a major military force had been defeated not by superior numbers or advanced technology, but by tactics and determination that most species couldn't comprehend. The Zephyrian Council received the news with a mixture of relief and bewilderment.
They had asked for information to be shared. They hadn't expected the humans to destroy a major fleet and then immediately begin providing humanitarian aid, with no expectation of compensation.
But that, Ambassador Kellerian realized as he watched the reports flowing in from Kepler 442 was exactly what they should have expected from a species that had named their flagship Defiance and their cruisers Vengeance, Justice, and Retribution.
The humans hadn't just saved the Silians. They had announced to the entire galaxy that Earth's children had joined the community of spacefaring species, and they had their own ideas about how things should be run.
The rescue operations on Kepler 442 lasted for 6 standard days, during which time the human fleet worked around the clock to provide medical aid, emergency shelter, and infrastructure repair for the devastated Silian population. What surprised galactic observers wasn't just the efficiency of human humanitarian operations, but the fact that they continued long after any conceivable military objective had been achieved. Dr. Telani, the Silian Minister of Health, stood in the ruins of what had been Kepler 442's primary medical complex, watching human engineers work alongside Silian technicians to rebuild the emergency trauma center.
The humans had brought not just medical supplies and temporary shelter, but actual construction equipment and engineering expertise to help rebuild what the Korvaxi had destroyed.
Telani, said Commander Harrison, who had been coordinating the relief efforts from the surface. We've established temporary medical facilities in all major population centers. Our doctors estimate that we can handle the current caseload, but we're concerned about long-term psychiatric care for the survivors.
Talani's large, expressive eyes reflected the exhaustion of someone who had spent 6 days coordinating disaster relief. But there was something else there, a kind of wonder that hadn't existed before the humans arrived. Commander Harrison, I must ask you something that has been troubling me since your fleet arrived, she said. Why are you doing this? The immediate military threat has been eliminated. You have achieved a decisive victory over a major galactic power. Why do you continue to spend time and resources helping strangers? Harrison paused in his review of the medical supply reports, considering the question carefully.
It wasn't the first time a Silian had asked him about human motivations, and he was beginning to understand that the answer revealed something fundamental about the differences between human psychology and that of other galactic species.
Dr. Telani, can I ask you a question in return? He said finally. When you see someone injured or suffering, what is your first instinct? To help them, of course.
All civilized species feel compassion for those in need. And when you see someone deliberately causing suffering to innocents, to report it to the appropriate authorities, I suppose. To ensure that legal action is taken. What if there are no authorities? What if the legal system is controlled by the people causing the suffering? Telani was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. I suppose one would need to find other authorities. Perhaps appeal to a higher galactic court, or petition the Zephyrian Council for mediation. Dr. Telani, Harrison said gently. Humans evolved in an environment where there were no higher authorities. No galactic councils, no legal systems, no mediators to appeal to when innocents were threatened. There was just us, and whatever we were willing to do to protect each other. But surely, as you developed civilization, you created legal institutions to handle such matters. We did, but we never forgot that those institutions only work when everyone agrees to respect them. When someone decides that law and civilization don't apply to them, sometimes the only response is to remind them why those institutions exist in the first place. As they spoke, a group of human Marines was helping Silian children clear debris from what had been a school playground. The sight of heavily armed soldiers playing impromptu games with alien children while waiting for construction equipment to arrive captured something essential about human nature that most galactic species found difficult to comprehend. The same individuals who had systematically destroyed a major military fleet 6 days earlier were now teaching Silian youngsters how to play baseball with improvised equipment and explaining the finer points of human music to anyone who expressed curiosity. Captain Okafor was conducting a very different kind of cultural exchange in the temporary command center that had been established in the ruins of the planetary government complex.
Representatives from a dozen different galactic species had arrived to observe human relief operations and attempt to understand the implications of what had happened at Kepler 442.
Captain, said Ambassador Kelrian of the Zephyrian Council, I must confess that your species' response to this crisis has been unexpected.
In what way, Ambassador? Okafor asked, though he was beginning to understand that human concepts of justice and obligation didn't translate well to species that had evolved under more peaceful circumstances. When we shared intelligence about the situation here, we anticipated that you might provide diplomatic support or perhaps technological assistance.
We did not anticipate that you would commit your entire fleet to a direct military confrontation with minimal chance of survival. Ambassador, 40 million people were about to die. What other response could there have been? A more measured approach, interjected Ambassador Vorth of the Andromedan Trade Confederation. Risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, diplomatic negotiations.
Surely your species understands that sometimes tragic events occur that are beyond our ability to prevent. Okafor studied the alien diplomats, recognizing that they were dealing with a fundamental philosophical divide that went far beyond differences in technology or culture.
Ambassador Vorth, he said carefully, let me pose a hypothetical situation to you. You're walking down a street and you see someone attacking a child. What do? I would immediately contact law enforcement and file a formal complaint, naturally. What if the person attacking the child is law enforcement? Then I would petition the courts for redress. What if the courts are controlled by the person attacking the child? Vorth's tentacles writhed in confusion. Then I suppose I would appeal to higher governmental authorities. And if there are no higher authorities? Captain, you're describing a situation in which all civilized institutions have failed. Such a scenario is essentially theoretical.
Ambassador, Okafor replied, the situation you're describing as theoretical is what those children on Kepler 45 were facing 6 days ago.
The Korvaxi had more firepower than anyone else in this region of space. They didn't recognize any legal authority higher than their own strength.
The Zephyrian Council, with all due respect, couldn't provide meaningful military protection. What exactly would you have had us do? File a formal complaint while children were being bombed from orbit.
The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr.
Kane, who had been conducting psychological assessments of the Silean survivors. Her expression was grim as she approached the group of assembled diplomats.
Captain, I need to brief you on something that changes our understanding of this situation significantly, she said. The Korvaxi weren't just conducting a military conquest.
They were implementing what can only be described as a systematic extermination protocol. Explain, Okafor said, though he suspected he wouldn't like the explanation.
The bombardment patterns show that they were specifically targeting schools, hospitals, and residential areas while avoiding industrial and resource extraction facilities. They weren't trying to force surrender. They were trying to eliminate the Silian population while preserving the infrastructure they wanted to exploit. The alien diplomats reacted with visible shock. Even among species that accepted conquest as a legitimate political tool, the deliberate targeting of non-combatants was considered beyond acceptable behavior.
Are you certain of this assessment? Ambassador Kelrian asked. The evidence is overwhelming, Kane replied. They were planning genocide, pure and simple. The ultimatum for surrender was just a way to demoralize the population before the systematic slaughter began.
Ambassador Vorth's tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of deep distress among his species. This changes everything.
The Andromedan Confederation has treaties with the Korvaxi hegemony.
We assumed they were conducting standard territorial expansion. Ambassador, Okafor said quietly, this is why humans responded the way we did. We've seen this pattern before in our own history. When someone starts talking about final solutions and systematic elimination of populations, the time for diplomatic negotiations has passed.
But how did you know? Kelrian asked. Your psychological assessment teams couldn't have reached these conclusions during the few hours between receiving our intelligence and launching your military response. We didn't need to reach these conclusions, Kane replied.
We've learned to recognize the early warning signs, a military force that targets civilian areas during the opening phases of an operation, that issues ultimatums calling for total surrender or complete extermination. That describes civilian populations as obstacles to be removed. We've seen this before.
We know how it ends. The cultural exchange was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Chen aboard the UES Defiance.
Her image appeared on the main display screen and her expression suggested that new complications were developing. Captain Okafor, we've received a priority communication from Earth Command. The Korvaxi hegemony has issued a formal declaration of war against humanity in response to our actions here. What are their demands? Okafor asked.
Complete withdrawal from all territories within 50 light-years of Korvaxi space, payment of reparations for ships destroyed at Kepler 421, and delivery of myself and the senior command staff for trial under Korvaxi military justice.
And Earth's response? Earth Command has formally rejected all demands and authorized full mobilization of planetary defense forces. We are officially at war with the Korvaxi hegemony as of 1400. Coordinated Universal Time.
The alien diplomats exchanged glances that spoke of rapidly recalculating political equations. A war between humans and the Korvaxi hegemony would have implications for every species in the galaxy, particularly given what they had just witnessed of human military capabilities. Admiral, Ambassador Kelrian said, the Zephyrian Council would like to offer our services as mediators in this conflict. Perhaps a peaceful resolution can still be achieved. Ambassador, I appreciate the offer, Chen replied. But I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental about this situation. The Korvaxi hegemony has spent decades conquering peaceful species and enslaving entire populations.
They've now escalated to attempted genocide. This isn't a territorial dispute that can be resolved through negotiation. This is a war between people who believe in the rule of law and people who believe that might makes right.
But surely some compromise is possible, Ambassador Vorth interjected. The cost of a full-scale war would be enormous for all parties involved.
Ambassador Vorth, Chen said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had made decisions that would affect the lives of billions. Let me be very clear about something.
Humanity didn't start this war. We didn't choose to make enemies of the Korvaxi hegemony, but we're not going to abandon our principles because someone threatens us with violence. What principles are those, Admiral? Kelrian asked. That innocent people have the right to live without fear. That children should be able to go to school without worrying about bombs falling from the sky. That might doesn't make right, and that sometimes good people have to fight to protect those who can't protect themselves. The transmission ended, leaving the assembled diplomats to contemplate the implications of what they had just heard.
For the first time in galactic history, a major power had declared war, not for territorial gain or resource acquisition, but purely as a matter of principle. Dr.
Kane looked around at the alien faces, seeing the struggle to comprehend human motivations reflected in their expressions.
Ambassadors, she said quietly, I think it's important for you to understand something about my species.
We're not naturally peaceful. We're naturally protective.
There's a difference. We're perfectly willing to fight when fighting is necessary to protect innocent lives.
The question isn't whether we'll back down when threatened. The question is whether the Korvaxi hegemony really wants to find out what happens when you threaten something that humans are determined to protect. As night fell over the primary continent of Kepler,
442. Human medical teams continued working in the temporary hospitals they had established. Human engineers continued rebuilding critical infrastructure, and human soldiers continued teaching Silian children games that had been played in schoolyards on Earth for generations. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had brought more than advanced military technology to their first contact with galactic civilization.
They had brought the accumulated wisdom of a species that had learned the hard way that sometimes the only choice was between fighting for what was right and watching everything good in the universe disappear. The Korvaxi had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs 6 months after the Battle of Kepler. 442. The war between humanity and the Korvaxi hegemony had evolved into something that galactic military historians would spend decades trying to understand. It wasn't the massive fleet engagements and planetary bombardments that characterized most interstellar conflicts. Instead, it had become a methodical campaign of liberation that followed patterns no other species had ever attempted. Commander Vex sat in a detention cell aboard the UES Justice, staring through reinforced transparisteel at the stars beyond.
His capture had come during the Battle of Rigel 7, when his task force had been attempting to pacify a rebellious mining colony that had refused to meet increased production quotas. The humans had arrived without warning, their ships emerging from stealth to surround his fleet before any effective resistance could be mounted.
The door to his cell opened, and Admiral Chen entered, carrying a datapad and 2 cups of what humans called coffee. She set 1 cup on the small table and took the seat across from him, her expression calm and professional.
Commander Vex, she said, we need to talk.
I have nothing to say to you, Vex replied, though his mandibles betrayed nervous tension. The Korvaxi hegemony does not negotiate with terrorists. Commander, I think you're misunderstanding our current situation, Chen said, taking a sip of her coffee.
This isn't a negotiation. This is a debriefing.
I'm here to help you understand why your military doctrine failed so completely, and what that means for the future of the Korvaxi hegemony. Despite himself, Vex found his attention drawn to the human admiral.
Over the past 6 months, he had watched his species' military might systematically dismantled by tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare he had been taught. Perhaps understanding how they had achieved their victories would be useful information to pass along, assuming he ever had the opportunity to do so.
Your species fights without honor, he said finally. Stealth attacks, targeting of command vessels, refusal to engage in direct combat.
These are the tactics of cowards. Chen nodded thoughtfully.
You're right that we don't fight the way you were taught to fight. Can you tell me why you think that might be? Because you lack the courage for honest battle. Commander, let me share something with you about human military history, Chen said, activating her datapad to display historical records. For most of our species' existence, we didn't fight wars between professional armies on designated battlefields according to agreed-upon rules. We fought for survival against predators that were stronger, faster, and better armed than we were. We learned very early that fighting honorably against a superior enemy is an excellent way to die nobly while accomplishing nothing useful. The display showed images from human conflicts throughout history, guerrilla warfare, resistance movements, asymmetrical conflicts where smaller forces had defeated larger ones through superior tactics and determination. Every human child learns about David and Goliath, Chen continued, a small shepherd boy defeating a giant warrior not through superior strength, but through superior thinking and the willingness to use unconventional methods.
It's one of our oldest stories because it represents something fundamental about human nature. Pretty stories, Vex said dismissively.
The reality is that your forces have been systematically avoiding direct confrontation with Korvaxi battle fleets. Commander, over the past 6 months, human forces have engaged and defeated 17 major Korvaxi task forces, liberated 43 worlds from hegemony control, and captured or destroyed more than 400 Korvaxi warships. Chen replied. How is that avoiding confrontation? Vex was silent, forced to confront the mathematical reality of his species' military losses.
The numbers were staggering, representing the destruction of nearly 30% of the hegemony's active fleet strength.
One mistake that cost them. Aliens cried for aid. Deathworlders arrived. HFY Sci-Fi.